Before I print my wood block, I'm actually going to reinforce it by gluing it down to another piece of wood and then also providing rails for printing. So the first step is to analyze which way your grain is running. So I want to glue down my wood, as I mentioned before, cross grain so that it has the strongest adhesion possible. As that glue dries in the wood, it's going to pull therefore in opposite directions based on the grain, and that's going to strengthen that bond. So I'm going to use another piece of luan, and I have another piece of wood there that I'm using as a guide to determine the width that my rails are going to be for printing. So the rails are just going to be other pieces of wood that will be the same height as the block that will keep the paper flat during the printing so that it doesn't fall down into the recesses that I've carved away. You can use anything like that piece of wood as a guide to give you the same measurement all the way around in a situation like this. I'm just going to use my block to draw straight lines. And you can see I have that big piece of section still remaining on the block at the top there. That's going to be where I'm going to place my registration pins. So it's not part of the actual image area. So what I'm going to do now is speed up the footage a little bit, but show you how to cut the luan with a ruler and a box cutter. So you see I'm clamping down the ruler so it doesn't move during the cutting. And I'm going to use a fresh blade in my box cutter, and I'm just going to keep scoring the wood until I cut through the layers of the luan. Sometimes you don't have to cut all the way through all the layers. You cut all the way down to the last layer and simply just break the luan, and it will just snap that last layer pretty cleanly. So here I'm looking at the height of the wood to make sure it's going to be good for my rails, and it's going to work. And then you saw earlier I used that piece of wood as my guide. Well, that piece of wood's the same thickness as my ruler, luckily, so I can just use my ruler here as the guide to make my rails. So again, the rails are other pieces of wood the same height as the top of the block where my image area is, and the paper will lay on the rails as well as on the image area of the block, and that will help to keep the paper from really smushing down into the non-image areas during printing. Now I'm also probably going to make a mask to go around my image area to cover my non-image area as well with Mylar, or you could use even something like an old lithography plate to protect the paper from becoming embossed by any texture that's there, or if any ink gets in there. It will keep that ink from coming into contact with the paper in the non-image areas. The next step is to glue our backing board to the printing block. So I'm just going to use Elmer's wood glue, and again I'm making sure that I'm gluing with the grains going in opposite directions here. And I'm just going to start by going around the perimeter of where the block is going to go and then filling in with the wood glue in the area where obviously the block is going to be in contact. You don't have to go crazy with the glue. Wood glue is really, really strong. You just need enough to do the job, and I think that's a good visual indication there about what you would need. Just going to line the block up, make sure that the top of the block is square to the piece of wood that I cut, and I'm going to clamp it and clamp all the way around the entire block. With these little spring clamps, what's good is to place something underneath the block, and then you'll be able to use clamps all the way around. So here I've removed my clamps, and I'm getting ready to polyurethane the block. I'm sanding the block because what I saw in it was a horizontal cut that would have become part of the image area, and I wanted to do everything I could to eliminate the mark that was there because it would have acted as a white line. If I was to print the image area black, it would have shown up as a white line through the black image area. So I'm going to sand that down. I'm going to use a coarse grit sandpaper right in the proximity of that cut that's in the block. And then I'm going to move up from the coarse to the finer sandpapers to smooth it out. I don't usually do this. In fact, I really want the grain to be present in the block. But in this case, I decided that it was better to do that than let this line sit there. If you wish to raise the grain in the block, you can use a wire brush to do so, and to go with that wire brush with the grain, and that will raise the grain up on the wood. So I'm going to put on my rubber gloves so that I don't absorb any polyurethane into my skin. And the first thing I want to do is to make sure that the block is free of any of the leftover remains from the sanding. And then I'm going to just dip my rag in, and I'm going to rub the polyurethane into my block. The reason I'm using a rag is because I don't want to use a brush and leave any globules of polyurethane that are going to create a texture in my block and therefore become part of the image area. I want this image area to be very smooth, and if I use the rag and rub it into the wood's going to absorb the polyurethane, and the polyurethane is not going to create any additional texture. So I'm going to speed up the footage. I'm going to go through and place the polyurethane on both the image area and non-image area, as well as the backing board for the block. The purpose of the polyurethane is that it's going to protect the wood during printing as well as during cleaning. During cleaning, if we were to use a water-based ink on this block, we'd have to clean the block with water. Of course, wood would absorb that water and it would expand, and that would alter the block and also start to dissolve its integrity. Therefore, the polyurethane is important protection against water for water-based inks, as well as solvents and degreasing agents for oil-based ink. Some people do this step actually beforehand. They will protect the wood with linseed oil or with a polyvinyl acetate glue, PVA glue. Some of that can actually help in the carving to keep plywood from splitting. But in case of something like linseed oil being rubbed into the wood, that's going to take a really long time to dry, so you have to do it well in advance before carving. I'm going to do 2 coats of polyurethane, and then when those are dry, it's time to move on to the printing.